Ethan Caldwell's hand shot out to grip the doorframe, his breath catching in his throat like he'd been punched in the chest. For a man who had stared down senators, crushed billion-dollar deals, and fired hundreds without blinking, this shouldn't be happening. Not to him, not now. But there it was. On the hand of the woman polishing his study cabinet, a woman he'd hired specifically to be invisible, forgettable, a ghost in his carefully controlled world, was a ring that had no business existing. A ring that should have been lost to time, buried in a past Ethan had spent 22 years and several $1 billion trying to forget. His vision blurred, the room tilted, and for the first time since he'd clawed his way out of the gutters of New Orleans, Ethan Caldwell felt something he thought he'd killed a long time ago. Fear. Look, Ethan wasn't the kind of man who got rattled, not by hostile takeovers, not by board meetings that could make or break empires, not by anything, really. He had built his entire reputation on staying calm when everyone else panicked. While competitors scrambled, Ethan calculated. While others got emotional, he got results. Cold, precise, ruthlessly effective results that had turned him into one of the most feared businessmen on the East Coast. So when he had walked into his study that Thursday afternoon, he'd fully expected to walk right past the new maid without a second thought. That was the whole point of hiring her, after all. Invisible, efficient, forgettable, someone who wouldn't disrupt the machinery of his perfectly orchestrated life, except she was wearing something he couldn't ignore. A ring. Not the kind of ring you'd expect to see in a penthouse that cost $8 million. Not diamonds glittering under designer lighting. Not gold that matched the fixtures and the carefully curated art on the walls. Not anything that belonged in a place like this. Just a thin piece of metal, tarnished and uneven, wrapped around a chip of blue stone. Handmade, crude, obviously old, and Ethan recognized it immediately, because he had made that ring with his own hands. 22 years ago, with scrap wire and a stone he'd found near the Mississippi River. In a world so different from this one, it might as well have been a different planet. For a girl he had promised to marry. A girl whose name he hadn't allowed himself to speak in 2 decades. A girl he had abandoned to build the empire that now felt like it was crumbling around him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan Caldwell owned more than most people could comprehend. His penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the most exclusive building in the city. Every surface gleamed. Every angle had been calculated by architects who charged more per hour than the average person earned in a month. His watch cost more than a luxury car. His suits were handmade in Milan. He had assistants for his assistants. Yet he couldn't remember the last time he had actually slept through the night. Every evening, he would lie in his custom-designed bed, imported sheets, temperature-controlled mattress, blackout curtains that cost a small fortune, and stare at the ceiling until dawn broke. His personal physician had prescribed pills, then different pills. His therapist suggested meditation apps and breathing exercises. Nothing worked. Control. That was what Ethan needed. Control over every detail, every variable, every potential disruption, to the precise machinery of his life. The temperature in each room, the thread count of the linens, the exact timing of his morning coffee. That was why, 3 weeks ago, he had terminated his entire household staff without warning. Someone had leaked information to the press. Details about his personal life, his schedule, his private meetings. Ethan never discovered who, so he eliminated the problem entirely. All 15 of them, gone in a single afternoon. His executive assistant, Marcus, a sharp, efficient man who knew better than to ask unnecessary questions, had presented him with a thick folder of applications for a replacement housekeeper the next day. "I need someone who doesn't exist," Ethan had said, not looking up from the contract he was reviewing. "Someone who won't talk, won't ask questions, won't try to be helpful beyond what's required. Someone invisible." Marcus had nodded once and left the room. 2 days later, he returned with a single file. Mara Lewis, 38 years old, 15 years of experience working for high-net-worth families across the city. Not a single complaint in her employment history. Not a single reference who could recall specific details about her personality. Perfect professional performance. Zero memorable presence. Exactly what Ethan wanted. Mara arrived on a Thursday morning. Ethan didn't greet her. He had Marcus show her to the staff quarters on the lower level and explain the rules. No conversation unless directly addressed. No presence in rooms Ethan occupied. No personal belongings in shared spaces. Work efficiently. Stay invisible. Leave no trace. She had nodded once, just once, and began working. For the first 2 days, Ethan barely registered her existence. She moved through the penthouse like smoke, cleaning surfaces he hadn't known needed attention, organizing spaces he had forgotten existed. He would walk into a room and sense something had shifted, though he couldn't identify what. The light seemed different somehow. Softer, maybe. But on the 3rd day, something changed. Ethan had been working late in his study, reviewing acquisition documents for a deal that would displace dozens of families to make room for luxury condos. The numbers were clean. The profit margin was exceptional. Everything made sense on paper. He stood to pour himself a drink. Single malt, aged 25 years, poured into crystal that cost more than most people's monthly rent. That was when he saw her. She was across the hall, in the sitting room he never used, wiping down the glass panels of a display cabinet. The late afternoon sun was slanting through the windows at just the right angle, and it caught something on her hand. Ethan's heart stopped. The ring. Thin. Uneven. Darkened with age. A crude piece of metalwork wrapped around a small stone that looked like it had been chipped from something larger. Something that had once mattered. His vision tunneled. The glass in his hand felt suddenly too heavy. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Because that ring shouldn't exist. He had made it in another lifetime. In a place where survival mattered more than success. For a girl who had watched the world with eyes that never stopped searching for hope. And he had promised her something he never delivered. Ethan set the glass down carefully, his hand trembling in a way it hadn't in years. He watched Mara work. She moved with quiet precision, never glancing his direction, never acknowledging his presence. But the ring remained. Tarnished. Simple. Impossible. That night, Ethan didn't sleep at all. He sat in his study, door closed, staring at the security footage from earlier in the day. He rewound it again and again, zoomed in until the image pixelated, enhanced it, studied every angle. The uneven soldering, the tiny scratch near the base where his hands had slipped 22 years ago, the chip of blue glass he had found near the river and convinced himself looked like the ocean she had never seen. His work, his promise, his ghost. By the time dawn light began creeping through the windows, Ethan had made a decision. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet, because if she was who he thought she was, then she had already been in his home for 3 months. 3 months, and she had chosen silence, which meant she remembered everything. And perhaps more terrifyingly, she had decided he wasn't worth acknowledging. For the first time in 22 years, Ethan Caldwell realized that all his wealth, all his power, all his carefully constructed control meant absolutely nothing. Because the only thing that had ever truly mattered was wearing a scrap metal ring and polishing glass in a mansion built on broken promises. The files Marcus had given him contained nothing useful. Employment history, references, background check, all of it sanitized, professional, utterly meaningless. But Ethan knew where to look for the truth. He opened his laptop and began searching for something he had spent 2 decades trying to bury. Not in files, not in databases, but in memory. A city built on water and music, a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and survival, and a girl whose name he had once whispered like a prayer before he learned to speak in contracts and closings. 22 years ago, Ethan Caldwell had been someone else entirely. Someone who had nothing, and someone who had made a promise he would spend the rest of his life paying for breaking. The files Marcus had given him contained nothing useful. Employment history, references, background check, all of it sanitized, professional, utterly meaningless. But Ethan knew where to look for the truth. He opened his laptop and began searching for something he had spent 2 decades trying to bury. Not in files, not in databases, but in memory. A city built on water and music, a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and survival, and a girl whose name he had once whispered like a prayer before he learned to speak in contracts and closings. 22 years ago, Ethan Caldwell had been someone else entirely. Someone who had nothing, and someone who had made a promise he would spend the rest of his life paying for breaking. New Orleans in the summer felt like drowning on dry land. The air was thick enough to choke on, heavy with humidity and the smell of the Mississippi River. A mix of mud, gasoline, and something rotting that you could never quite identify. Young Ethan had grown up with that smell in his lungs, sleeping on a mattress he'd pulled from a dumpster behind the old Beaumont Hotel on Dauphine Street. The mattress had stains he didn't want to think about, springs that dug into his back no matter how he positioned himself. But it was his, and in a world where the system had shuffled him through 3 foster homes in 2 years before giving up entirely, ownership of anything, even garbage, mattered. He survived by fixing things. Broken fans for corner stores. Busted radios for the jazz musicians who played in the quarter. Anything that earned him enough cash for food and kept him off the streets during the worst of the heat. That was how he met Amara. She was younger than him by almost 2 years, small and quiet, with eyes that watched everything, like she was trying to memorize the world before it disappeared. She cleaned tables at Rosalie's diner in exchange for whatever food they couldn't sell. Day-old biscuits, grits that had sat too long, coffee so burnt it tasted like charcoal. They never talked about how they'd ended up where they were. That was the unspoken rule of survival. You didn't ask. You didn't dig. You just existed alongside each other and hoped tomorrow wouldn't be worse than today. But somehow, they became something. Not a couple, exactly. Not in the way people with real lives became couples. Just 2 people who understood that being alone was harder than being together. The night of the storm, everything changed. The rain came down so hard it sounded like the sky was tearing itself apart. Thunder rattled the boarded-up building where they'd taken shelter, and lightning turned the darkness into strobe light panic. Amara was shaking, not from cold, but from something deeper. Fear that went beyond weather. Ethan didn't have much to offer. No blankets, no reassurances that meant anything. Just his presence, and a stubborn refusal to let her face it alone. That was when he saw it. A piece of wire on the floor, thin and copper, probably from some electrical work someone had abandoned. And near the window, caught in a crack, a small chip of blue glass worn smooth by time. His hands moved almost without thinking, twisting the wire, bending it, pressing the glass into place until it held. It wasn't pretty. The solder was uneven. The metal had already started to tarnish. But when he slipped it onto Amara's finger, her eyes went wide. "It looks like the ocean," she whispered. "The one I've never seen." Ethan's throat tightened. "When I make it out of here," he said, his voice shaking with a confidence he didn't deserve, "I'll come back. I swear, I'll marry you. This ring, it's proof I won't forget." She had laughed, not because she didn't believe him, but because believing hurt too much. 3 weeks later, a man in an expensive suit found Ethan repairing a generator behind a restaurant in the French Quarter. His name was Richard Voss. Tech investor, venture capital, someone who saw potential where others saw trash. He offered Ethan a scholarship to a coding boot camp in California, relocation, mentorship, a clean break from everything. One condition: no ties, Voss had said, stirring his coffee like they were discussing the weather. "I've seen too many talented kids fail because they tried to drag their old lives with them. You want this, you leave everything behind. No looking back. No distractions. No promises you can't keep." Ethan nodded. He told himself he'd return once he'd made it. Once he had money, and stability, and something real to offer. He told himself promises could wait. That success would make everything easier. He told Amara he'd write, that he'd call, that it was temporary. She'd smiled and touched the ring on her finger. "Go," she'd said. "I'll be here." Weeks became months. Months became years. And the boy who'd made a ring from scrap metal became a man who signed contracts worth more than entire city blocks. He never went back. Until now, when the past had walked into his penthouse, wearing the evidence of everything he'd destroyed. Ethan spent the next 72 hours doing what he did best, gathering information. He pulled Mara's employee file from Marcus's records and spread everything across his desk. Mara Lewis, 38 years old. Current address listed as a studio apartment in Queens. Previous employers: the Hendersons, the Morgans, the Winthrops. All families whose names appeared regularly in the society pages. 15 years of impeccable service. Not a single complaint. Not a single memorable detail. He stared at the intake photo clipped to the file. A woman with her hair pulled back, eyes lowered, expression neutral, professional, forgettable. Except it wasn't forgettable, not anymore. Because Ethan realized with growing horror that she had been in his house for 3 months. moving through his spaces, cleaning his things, existing in his world. And he had never once looked at her face. Not once. He had walked past her dozens of times, had probably been in the same room with her for hours collectively, and he couldn't recall a single feature beyond that ring. The penthouse suddenly felt obscene. 8,000 square feet of marble and glass and expensive emptiness. Hallways wide enough to drive a car through. Ceiling so high his footsteps echoed. Rooms he hadn't entered in months because he'd run out of purposes for them. It was the opposite of Rosalie's diner, where you could barely move without bumping into someone, where the air smelled like burnt coffee and survival, where warmth came from proximity rather than a thermostat programmed to exactly 72 degrees. Ethan pulled up the security footage. He started with the day she'd arrived and watched in fast forward, tracking her movements through camera angles that covered every corner of his home. She worked methodically. Kitchen, living room, study, guest bedrooms that never hosted guests. He slowed the footage down and began to notice things. How she never looked directly at him. Even when he entered a room she was cleaning, her eyes would drop immediately, her body angling away as if she could make herself smaller, less intrusive. How she touched the ring when she thought she was alone. A quick brush of her thumb against the tarnished metal. A momentary pause as if steadying herself. How she avoided the jazz records in his collection, even though they were covered in dust and clearly needed attention. Ethan watched her clean the same glass cabinet 5 times in the footage from different days. The movements were identical, efficient, professional. But in one clip, when the afternoon light hit the cabinet at just the right angle, she stopped for exactly 3 seconds, her hand hovering over the glass, fingers trembling. Then she'd continued as if nothing had happened. The vast loneliness of the penthouse pressed in on him. 14 rooms, 6 bathrooms, a wine cellar he'd stocked but never visited, floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased a city of 8 million people, while somehow making him feel completely alone. And in all that space, in all that carefully designed luxury, the only thing that mattered was a woman who made herself invisible and a ring that shouldn't exist. Ethan closed the laptop. She knew exactly who he was, and she had chosen to say nothing. Ethan became methodical in his approach. He wasn't ready to confront her directly, not yet, because if she had remained silent for 3 months, there was a reason, and Ethan needed to understand that reason before he could figure out what came next. So he started testing. On Monday morning, he left a jazz record playing in the kitchen. Not just any record, Louis Armstrong, the same album they used to listen to through a broken radio at the diner. The vinyl crackled, the trumpet notes filling the silence of the penthouse. Ethan watched from his study through the partially open door. Mara entered the kitchen to refill the coffee pot. She froze for exactly 2 seconds when the music registered. Her hand tightened around the carafe. Then she continued working, her movements perhaps slightly more rigid than usual, but otherwise giving nothing away. On Tuesday, he left a coffee table book open to a page showing the Mississippi River at sunset, the French Quarter visible in the distance. He positioned it in the living room, where she'd have to see it while dusting. She dusted around it, closed the book carefully, returned it to the shelf. No reaction. On Wednesday, he casually mentioned New Orleans to Marcus within Mara's earshot, talking about a business trip he was supposedly considering. He watched her reflection in the window. She continued folding linens without missing a beat. The tension in the penthouse became unbearable. Every interaction, or lack of interaction, felt loaded with meaning. Ethan found himself timing his movements to coincide with hers, engineering opportunities for proximity, while maintaining the pretense of indifference. She remained perfect, professional, impenetrable, until Thursday. Ethan left something on the kitchen counter before heading to his study. Not a book, not a record, just a small chip of blue glass he'd purchased from an antique shop, almost identical to the one in the ring he'd made 22 years ago. He watched through the security camera feed on his phone. Mara entered the kitchen to prepare lunch. She saw the glass immediately. Her entire body went rigid. She approached the counter slowly, as if the small object might explode. Her hand reached out, trembling visibly, even through the camera feed. She touched it once, pulled back, touched it again, then she picked it up and held it to the light, and Ethan saw something he hadn't seen in any of the footage before. Tears. Silent, controlled, but unmistakable. She carefully placed the glass in her apron pocket, composed herself with visible effort, and continued preparing lunch as if nothing had happened. Ethan sat back in his chair, his chest tight. She wasn't just a victim of his abandonment. She wasn't just someone he'd hurt and forgotten. She was someone who had survived the ruin of his absence, who had built a life despite the wreckage he'd left behind, who had chosen to walk into his home, where the evidence of his broken promise, and remain silent. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd learned to live with what he'd done. And that realization was far more devastating than anger would have been. The boardroom on the 42nd floor smelled like leather and ambition. Ethan sat at the head of the table, surrounded by lawyers and executives, reviewing the final details of the Riverside development project. On paper, it was brilliant. A luxury residential complex that would transform 8 blocks of waterfront property into premium real estate. Projected profit, $230 million over 5 years. The cost, displacing 47 families currently living in rent-controlled housing. The legal team has confirmed all eviction notices are within regulation, his chief counsel was saying, sliding documents across the polished table. We've offered relocation assistance packages, though most tenants won't accept them. They want to stay, but that's not our problem. Ethan stared at the architectural renderings. Glass towers, infinity pools, private marina access, amenities that would cost more per month than most people earned in a year. He thought about a mattress pulled from a dumpster, about a girl who cleaned tables for burnt biscuits, about the difference between surviving and living. Ethan, his business partner Victoria, touched his arm. You all right? You seem distracted. Victoria Marsh, 42, Harvard MBA. Impeccable taste. The kind of woman who looked perfect in boardrooms and at charity galas. They'd been seeing each other for 6 months, though seeing each other was a generous term for whatever their arrangement actually was. Fine, Ethan said. Just thinking. Well, think faster. We need your signature on these documents by end of day. Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Just efficiency. Just business. She was everything Mara wasn't. Polished. Ambitious. Comfortable in the world Ethan had built for himself. And utterly, completely hollow. That evening, Victoria joined him for dinner at his penthouse. She arrived in a dress that cost more than Mara probably earned in 3 months, carrying expensive wine and talking about a gallery opening they were expected to attend. Ethan barely heard her. His mind kept returning to the ring, to scrap metal and blue glass, to the obscenity of his billion-dollar empire compared to the only thing he'd ever made with his own hands. You're not listening, Victoria said, irritation creeping into her voice. Sorry. Long day. Is it the Riverside deal? Because honestly, Ethan, you can't let sentimentality interfere with business. Those families will be fine. They always are. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he felt nothing. What if they're not fine? He asked quietly. Victoria laughed. Then that's life. You can't save everyone, darling. That's not how this works. She reached for his hand, her fingers adorned with a diamond bracelet he'd given her for her birthday. You built something incredible. Don't apologize for success. Mara appeared silently to clear the dishes. She moved like a ghost, eyes lowered, hands steady. Victoria didn't acknowledge her. Why would she? The staff was invisible. But Ethan saw the ring on Mara's finger, tarnished metal catching the light. A promise, made in poverty. A bond forged in survival. Worth more than everything in this room combined. Actually, Ethan said, pulling his hand away from Victoria, I think we need to talk about where this is going. Victoria's expression sharpened. Meaning I don't think this is working anymore. The silence that followed was cold and calculating. Victoria set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. Is this about the Maid? She asked, her voice like ice. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The charity fundraiser was Ethan's least favorite type of event. Rich people pretending to care about problems they'd never experienced. Writing checks large enough to feel virtuous, but small enough to not actually matter. But attendance was expected. Image management. Relationship building. All the things that came with the territory of being Ethan Caldwell. The penthouse was transformed for the occasion. 200 guests. Catered food. A jazz quartet playing in the corner, though notably, not Louis Armstrong. Mara was assigned to assist with service, along with 3 other staff members Marcus had hired for the evening. She wore the standard uniform, simple black dress, hair pulled back, and moved through the crowd with the same invisible efficiency she brought to everything. Ethan watched her while pretending to listen to a real estate developer drone on about zoning regulations. She carried trays of champagne glasses with steady hands, navigating the crowd without ever making eye contact with the guests. The ring was still on her finger. "Ethan, darling." Carolyn Ashford swept toward him, dripping in jewelry and self-importance. Her family's wealth predated the Civil War, and she never let anyone forget it. "What a lovely event, though I must say, your staff selections are interesting." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Meaning?" "Well, diversity is important, of course, but perhaps for an event of this caliber." She trailed off with a meaningful look toward Mara. Before Ethan could respond, Caroline called out to Mara. "You dear, more champagne over here." Mara approached with a fresh tray, eyes lowered. Caroline took a glass, her gaze landing on Mara's hand. Her expression shifted into something cruel. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "What is that on your finger?" Mara's hand trembled slightly. "Just a ring, ma'am." "Just a ring." Caroline laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the jazz music. "Darling, that looks like something you'd find in a gutter. Scrap metal and, is that glass? How quaint. Does Ethan not pay you enough for proper jewelry?" Several guests turned to watch, smelling drama like sharks sensing blood. "It has sentimental value," Mara said quietly, starting to pull away. Caroline reached out and grabbed Mara's wrist. "Let me see it up close. I simply must understand why anyone would wear something so trashy too." The ring slipped off Mara's finger in Caroline's careless grip. It hit the marble floor with a small metallic sound that somehow felt deafening. The crowd gasped. Champagne glasses paused mid-sip. The jazz quartet continued playing, oblivious. Mara dropped to her knees immediately, reaching for the ring. Caroline stood above her, smirking. "How clumsy of you. Really, dear, you should be more careful with your treasures." The humiliation was complete. A maid on her knees in front of 200 people who had more money than empathy. Caroline's friends snickered. Phones appeared, ready to capture a moment they'd share later. Ethan moved before thinking. He crossed the room in 5 strides, dropped to his knees beside Mara, and picked up the ring before she could reach it. The entire penthouse went silent. Even the jazz quartet stopped playing. Ethan held the ring up, turning it slowly so the light caught the tarnished metal and the small chip of blue glass. "This ring," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "is worth more than everything in this apartment combined." Caroline laughed nervously. "Ethan, don't be ridiculous. I made this ring 22 years ago. With my own hands. From wire I found in an alley and glass I pulled from broken rubble. I made it for someone who mattered. Someone real." He stood, still holding the ring, his eyes scanning the crowd of people who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. "I gave it as a promise. A promise I broke to become the man you all know. The man who signs your contracts, and funds your charities, and plays whatever role you need him to play." He turned to face Caroline directly. "This ring represents the only honest thing I've ever done in my life. And you just called it trash." Caroline's face went pale. "I didn't mean I was just—" "Get out," Ethan said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my home. Now." The room erupted in whispers. Phones captured everything. Caroline's mouth opened and closed like a fish, searching for words that wouldn't come. She left. Half the guests followed, unwilling to risk their own social standing by staying. Ethan didn't care. He turned to Mara, who was still kneeling, her face unreadable. He held out the ring. "I'm sorry," he said. For the first time in 22 years he meant it. Mara took the ring with shaking hands, slipped it back onto her finger, and stood. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice professionally neutral. Then she walked away to continue serving the remaining guests as if nothing had happened. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how Ethan and Mara's journey unfolds, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Ethan can truly make things right? Let us know what you think, and stay tuned for what happens next. The last guest left at midnight. Ethan stood in the wreckage of the gala. Empty champagne glasses, abandoned plates, the lingering smell of expensive perfume and judgment. Marcus had dismissed the temporary staff. The catering company would return tomorrow for their equipment. The penthouse felt larger than ever, emptier than ever. Mara was in the kitchen, methodically cleaning, her movements precise despite the late hour. Ethan approached slowly, each step on the marble floor, echoing like a countdown. "Mara," he said. She didn't look up. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell? We need to talk." "About what, sir?" The formality was a weapon, and they both knew it. "About the ring. About New Orleans. About—" He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't sound hollow. "About Amara." Her hand stilled on the wine glass she was washing. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, "That was a long time ago. Not so long that you stopped wearing the ring." "I wear a lot of things, Mr. Caldwell. It doesn't mean they matter." The lie was so transparent it hurt. "Please," Ethan said. And the desperation in his voice surprised even him. "Please just look at me." Mara set down the glass carefully, dried her hands on a towel, turned to face him. Her eyes were the same. Still searching, still watching the world as if it might disappear. But there was something else there now. Something harder. Something earned through years of surviving his absence. "What do you want me to say?" she asked quietly. "That I forgive you? That seeing you again doesn't hurt? Watching you build this empire while I cleaned other people's houses for 2 decades was easy. No, You wanted invisible, Mr. Caldwell. You got it. I've been invisible my whole life. One more wealthy man not seeing me wasn't exactly a challenge." "Why did you come here?" Ethan asked. "Why take this job? Why walk into my home wearing that ring if you didn't want me to know?" Mara smiled, but there was no joy in it. "I wanted to see if you'd remember, if any part of the boy who made promises still existed under all this." She gestured at the penthouse. "Now I know. I do remember. I never forgot. You forgot enough." She removed her apron, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. "Thank you for defending me tonight. It was unnecessary, but kind. Consider my employment terminated as of now." "What? No. You can't just—" "Good night, Mr. Caldwell." She walked past him, and Ethan felt panic rising in his chest. "Wait, please. Let me explain. Let me try to make this right." Mara stopped in the doorway, but didn't turn around. "Some things can't be fixed by money, Ethan. You of all people should know that." Then she was gone. Ethan didn't sleep. At dawn, he went to the staff quarters on the lower level, knocked on Mara's door. No answer. He opened it slowly. The room was empty. Bed made. Closet cleared. No trace that anyone had ever been there except for a folded piece of paper on the pillow. Ethan's hands shook as he unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, controlled, devastating in its simplicity. "You asked me once why I came here. The truth? I needed to know if the boy who made me a ring still existed somewhere inside the man who forgot me. I needed to see if 22 years of success had erased every trace of who you used to be. What ruined my life wasn't that you left. People leave. Circumstances change. I understand that now. What ruined my life was believing for too long that you'd return. That promises made in poverty meant something. That I mattered enough to remember. I came to your home because I needed to see if you'd recognize me. If you'd see past the uniform and the careful invisibility and realize who was standing in your kitchen. It took you 3 months. 3 months of me being 10 feet away from you, and you never once looked at my face. That's what I needed to know. Your success was built on the wreckage of my hope, and that's something you'll have to live with. But I'm done living with it. Amara." Ethan sank onto the empty bed, the note crumpling in his fist. For 22 years he'd told himself he'd made the right choice. That leaving was necessary. That success justified everything. Now, sitting in a staff room that cost more to furnish than the entire building where they'd grown up, Ethan finally understood the true cost of his empire. It wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the hope of a girl who'd believed in a promise made from scrap metal and blue glass. Ethan's assistant found him in the study 3 hours later, unshaven, still wearing yesterday's clothes, staring at a computer screen filled with search results. "Sir, you have a meeting at—" "Cancel it," Ethan said without looking up. "But it's the Riverside Development final. Cancel all of it. Everything. I'm taking a leave of absence." Marcus appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his usually neutral face. "Mr. Caldwell, are you all right?" "No," Ethan said simply. "And I haven't been for a very long time." He booked a flight to New Orleans that afternoon. He didn't call ahead, didn't send anyone to prepare the way. For the first time in 2 decades, Ethan Caldwell traveled alone, with nothing but a carry-on bag and the crushing weight of his own failures. The city had changed, and stayed the same in equal measure. The French Quarter still smelled like beignets and jazz. The Mississippi still rolled past, indifferent to human drama. But buildings he remembered were gone. Streets he'd walked had been repaved. The diner where Amara had cleaned tables was now a boutique hotel. Gentrification, progress, the same forces Ethan had helped drive in a dozen other cities. He walked the streets he used to know, seeing ghosts everywhere. The alley where he'd fixed radios. The corner where they'd shared day-old bread. The place where the hotel dumpster had been before the entire building was torn down and replaced with luxury condos. People passed him without recognition. Why would they? He was just another tourist. Another man in expensive clothes with sad eyes, and nowhere in particular to be. It took 3 days of searching before he found anyone who remembered her. An older woman working at a community center near the river looked at the photo on his phone, the one he'd pulled from Mara's employee file, and nodded slowly. Amara? Yeah, she volunteers here sometimes. Teaches kids how to read. Good woman. Keeps to herself but good. Is she here now? Tuesdays and Thursdays. Reading circle at 4. Ethan checked his watch. Thursday, 3:30. He waited outside, watching through the window as children gathered around tables. And then she arrived, carrying a box of books, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked different than she had in his penthouse. Lighter somehow. Free. She laughed at something a child said, helped a young girl sound out words. Moved through the space with easy confidence, no longer making herself invisible. This was her life. Simple. Dignified. Built entirely without his money or his promises. And it was beautiful. Ethan stood there until the reading circle ended, until the children were picked up by parents, until Amara was locking the community center door. That's when she saw him. She didn't look surprised, just tired. You shouldn't have come, she said. I know. I said everything I needed to say in that note. I know that too. Amara sighed and started walking toward the river. After a moment, Ethan followed. They stood by the water as the sun began to set, painting the Mississippi in shades of orange and gold. The same river that had witnessed their childhood. The same city that had shaped them both in completely different ways. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, Ethan finally said. I don't deserve it. Then why are you here? Because you were right. About everything. My success was built on wreckage. And I've spent 22 years running from that truth. He pulled something from his pocket. The blue glass chip from his study. I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the years I stole. But I can stop running. Amara looked at the glass, but didn't take it. What do you want from me, Ethan? Nothing, he said honestly. I just needed you to know that I finally see what I destroyed. And that I'm sorry, not because I want something from you, but because you deserve to hear it. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of water and distant traffic, and 2 decades of unspoken pain. I built a good life without you, Amara said quietly. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what I imagined when I was 17. But it's mine. I can see that. And I don't need you to fix it or save it, or whatever it is you think you're doing. I know. She finally looked at him, really looked at him. The boy who made that ring? He's been gone a long time, Ethan. I know, Ethan said. But maybe I can try to find him again. Amara studied him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring. The scrap metal and blue glass that had survived 22 years. She held it out to him. Then start by earning this back. They didn't embrace. There were no tearful declarations or promises of forever. Just 2 people sitting on a bench by the Mississippi River as the sun set and the city hummed around them. I canceled the Riverside development deal, Ethan said after a while. 47 families get to stay in their homes. That's good. I'm also selling most of the company. Keeping enough to live comfortably, but not obscenely. The rest is going into a foundation. Housing. Education. Things that actually matter. Amara was quiet for a moment. That doesn't fix what happened between us. I know. And it doesn't mean I trust you. I wouldn't expect you to. She turned the ring over in her hands, watching the light catch the tarnished metal. Why did you really come here, Ethan? Because I've spent 22 years building things that don't matter. And I wanted to see if there was anything left worth rebuilding. And? I don't know yet, he admitted. But I'd like to find out. Not by throwing money at it. Not by making promises I'm not sure I can keep. Just by showing up, by doing the work, by earning back the right to be in your life in whatever way you're willing to allow. Amara stood, holding the ring up between them. The scrap metal glinted in the fading light. This ring was made by a boy who had nothing, but still wanted to give something, who understood that promises matter because they cost something. She looked at him steadily. "Can you be that person again?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly, "but I want to try." "Then prove it." She placed the ring in his palm and closed his fingers around it. "Don't make promises. Don't throw money around. Don't try to fix things from a distance. Just show up. Every day. And maybe, you'll earn the right to give this back to me." Ethan felt the weight of the ring in his hand. Lighter than any contract he'd ever signed. Heavier than anything he'd ever carried. "How do I start?" Amara smiled. Not the sad smile from his penthouse, but something real. "The community center needs someone to teach kids how to fix things. Broken electronics. Basic repairs. Things that help people survive." She tilted her head. "Think you can handle that?" "I haven't fixed anything in 22 years. "Then I guess you'll have to relearn." They sat there as darkness fell, watching the river flow past, carrying the weight of history and the possibility of something new. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't even really a beginning yet. It was just a choice. A moment. An acknowledgement that some things can't be bought or solved. They can only be earned through effort, time, and the willingness to face what you've broken. Ethan looked at the ring in his hand. At the woman beside him who had survived his absence and built something beautiful anyway. At the city that had shaped them both. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "Neither do I," Amara said. "But at least this time, you're starting with the truth." The Mississippi rolled on, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in the distance, jazz music drifted through the warm night air. Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, empire builder, man who had everything and nothing, held a ring made from scrap metal and blue glass. And for the first time in 22 years he understood exactly what it was worth. Not a promise, just a beginning. The kind that has to be earned. Thanks for watching this story unfold. If you enjoyed Ethan and Amara's journey of loss, redemption, and second chances, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Ethan's position? Do you believe people can truly change? Let us know, and don't forget to check out our other powerful stories. See you in the next video.